Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm welcome to tonight's broadcast. I'm your humble host, William Wolfton, and I do hope you're feeling quite fine this evening. March 30th, the weather as we find it on this splendid evening sits at a comfortable 70 degrees Fahrenheit, or 21 degrees Celsius for our friends across the pond in Europe. And to my Floridian listeners, I bring you the news of nice warm days with highs of the late 80s and the nice cool 60s for your nights. But enough of the weather, my dear listeners. It's time for the real meat of tonight's program, as we delve into the interesting and the rather delicious stories for today. What's on the broadcast docket for today, you may ask yourself? Well, I've got good news for you. We're going to have a little dive into Disney's latest remake of Snow White. Well, we're going to have a little bit of a look at the ever-controversial Hassan Piker. And we're going to put in a little bit of a splash of Johnny Somali. So stay tuned for some honest, unfiltered opinions coming your way right now. So let's get to business, shall we? Alright, first things first. Disney Snow White. Good lord. Disney Snow White is, in my opinion, a total failure, to say the least. Probably Disney's greatest failure to date. Let me ask you something. Why does Disney continue to produce remake after remake despite constantly flopping and facing backlash online? They are literally living the definition of insanity right now. Their attempts at woke live action content is unwanted by their fan base. The current ones and the former ones as well. And I have said this time and time again. These live action remakes, although they may provide nostalgia if you do it right, you cannot flip the entire storyline, essentially botching it to the point that it makes an entirely new storyline for a film that is a childhood classic to many older Disney fans. However, my other thing, whoever allowed Rachel Zegler to publicly criticize the movie while still being involved in it, in the production, should be held accountable. And good God Almighty, Rachel Zegler's comments about the movie. I can't believe she was fired for telling half America not to watch it. Was she out of her mind? Or just plain off her meds? And let me tell you something. I hope, and I genuinely mean this, if Rachel Zegler is as bad as she was in the interviews, blaming the audience for how bad it flopped, I pray she was not as much of a nuisance to her fellow cast. But I will say this. As much as I'd like to believe that these reviews are in fact paid, like rating-wise, if it's 73% on the popcorn meter, maybe it's not as bad as, like, obviously, it does have its messages and shit like that. But maybe for, like, the perspective of a little kid, maybe it's not that bad of a movie. I personally won't ever be willing to see it, but if it comes free on Netflix or something like that, I'll probably take a stab at it to see how it is. Now answer me this. Disney, just out of curiosity, how could you say, as a company, say you're all about inclusivity, and yet you decide to use CGI instead of 7 real dwarves? I just don't understand
how they could say that or what they were thinking. I think it's safe to say that the live-action remake is probably one of the most embarrassing flops in Disney's history. Not only was it bad, but as a company, Disney made a fool of themselves. Some scenes even come off as blatant propaganda. And there's no denying, this movie's legacy will likely be remembered as Disney's biggest failure of all time. And that's my whole thing with Disney. Now, for the main course. Let's talk about yet another interesting subject that needs to be discussed. How many of you guys are on Twitch? I'm sure a lot of you use it. I don't know what my numbers are as a fact, but I'm sure at least some of you use Twitch. How many of you know an individual by the name of Piker? Well, he is in fact known for supporting terrorist groups. I don't know which ones per se, but I know he at least supports some of them. And the only redeeming thing I will think that he is good on is the fact that he hates child molesters. But at the same time, don't get your hopes up, because he says that babies are okay military targets. So he hates child predators, but he's okay with the death of babies. That's personally disgusting. And you know, the funny thing is, he actively propagates this on Twitch. And from my understanding, that's underneath and against the TOS of Twitch. Specifically, the community guidelines. And I quote, underneath the community guidelines, underneath terrorism and violent extremism, terrorism and violent, extreme unlawful violence, and spread messages of intolerance, Twitch does not allow content that picks, glorify, encourages, or supports terrorism or violent extreme actors or acts. This includes threatening or to encourage others to commit acts that would result in serious physical harm or significant property damage. And under one of the examples, it says, for example, you may not display or link terrorist or extremist propaganda, including graphic pictures or footage of terrorists or extreme violence, even for the purpose of denouncing such content. So like any mention of terrorism or extremism, that's not allowed on Twitch, and yet, somehow, this silver spoon-fed. You know the worst part about it is, I wouldn't doubt that he has connections to Twitch. Allegedly. That's just my theory anyway. But how else would he not be banned off Twitch? It's a mystery, to say the least. And will it be a mystery to be solved? Who knows? Because frankly, I couldn't tell you, even if I wanted to try to figure out. Oh, and just to give you a simple taste on some of this guy's takes, I will play some clips from Piker's, and you will see how much of an insufferable, half-witted Nimrod this man really is. And as much as I hate to break the immersion of this being a radio station, I'd like you to be able to hear everything that this guy is saying. But if you would much rather I keep the immersion, I will probably make it also sound like it's speaking through a radio as well on the next broadcast. So don't worry about it for this time. But feel free to give me input anyway. Here are some Hassan, or I like to call him, as well as someone else I know who likes to call him Hamas Piker.
Palestinians, and this is going to sound very radical and possibly very violent, but this is a matter of law and maybe even if you agree with this, a matter of morality, Palestinians have the legal ground to violently seize back their own homes from these settlers. This is a reality, and that is precisely the reason why they have to exist under endless occupation in the West
You know
Bank.
what? And that's why I say, if it was settlers, that would be a lot more understandable. But let's not obfuscate. Okay, I understand what you're saying, but this dude just called babies militants.
No, I understand. And there are baby settlers as well. But there are baby settlers as well. There are babies in the settlements.
But the babies that killed were not.
I know.
Okay, so
here's now that we establish that.
Yeah.
No, hold on. Now that
Can we just, I'll play it one more time for you.
occupation in the West
You know
Bank.
what? And that's why I say, if it was settlers, that would be a lot more understood.
There's about $50 billion estimated that are lost every year in Medicaid, just in fraud alone.
Nope. If you cared about Medicare fraud or Medicaid fraud, you would kill Rick Scott.
And that was only a taste. Interesting guy, to say the least. And obviously everything that I've mentioned before and said is my own personal opinion, because unlike in the United Kingdom, I can actually have my freedom of speech. But there is no denying he has one of the most interesting groups of individuals out there, probably to date. Because from my understanding, again, this is my own personal opinion, this fan base is known for being rather ruthless individuals, especially in the slandering department, with all the typical threats now, and with all the typical threats. Now you may ask yourself, William, are you scared of Hamas pikers, people? Well, that's a good question, and the answer is no. Because I just can't help but laugh at these nimrods defending someone who doesn't even care about them, and probably hates them too. But of course you'd never say that to their face, because they throw a tantrum worse than a 2-year-old. And here's a little thing about me. The only real information I'll give out is those who I hire, those who I'm legally bound to share with it, and federal officials. As for the rest, Google accounts, Facebook, all that, I just lie. And honestly, it's none of their business. If they want to know my location, tough luck. I don't share it. I don't share anything unless I don't share anything unless it's for official forms. Most of my data is locked down, and that's how I like it. And for those who don't understand why I'm not afraid of these little gremlins that Hassan Piker has under his wing, here's why. Where I live, we have something called stand your ground laws. That means if I'm faced with a situation where I believe my life is at risk, lethal force is allowed, especially if my life is threatened. Just explaining the law here. Section 776-013, if you're curious. Alright, moving on to the last part of tonight's broadcast. Probably the most irrelevant of the three, but nonetheless worth mentioning. Johnny Somali. Honestly, given the way Rachel Zegler's been acting, it wouldn't surprise me if she ends up going down the same path when it comes to relevancy. But hey, let's dive just into one more quick segment about Rachel before we get to Johnny. Sound good? Alright, let's do it. Now, Rachel Zegler. I know there's no shortage of controversial celebrities these days, but I've never seen someone rise to fame so fast
only to have their career burn out just as quickly by just one film. But also having an attitude that just doesn't sit well. And honestly, her interviews make Ellen DeGeneres seem like the nicest person off camera. And now for the grand finale. Now you might be asking yourself, William, who is Johnny Somali? Well, allow me to introduce you to him. A man who ruined his life for clout. I know that's not entirely original when it comes to internet downfalls and relevance being short-lived, but he quite literally ruined his life after expecting his American rights to be effective in a different country. Now, initially I thought this was a joke a few months back, but after recently getting wind of it again, when he is currently facing several charges, I don't know the amount, but I know how many, 7 different charges, though I don't know the amount, like the counts. He is currently, well, alleged, currently facing, and the funniest part about it is, he's live-streamed all of his crimes. Okay, the first one is harassment, disturbing the peace, public nuisance, illegal streaming. Now, just to give some context, in some places in South Korea, you're not supposed to live stream, so that's understandable. Sexual harassment, shall I say more? Assault and vandalism. Now again, these are all alleged. And you know what my thoughts on this whole thing is? Well, here you go. This guy has got to be the dumbest criminal to date. And the reason why I say criminal is because he's officially a felon in South Korea. And the reason why I say he's stupid is because he's live-streamed himself doing all of this. I'm willing to bet his lawyer must have hated the fact that he kept live-streaming all of it. And had a whole lot of trouble trying to defend him. Because he was dumb enough to live-stream all of the evidence. And you know the South Korean courts are just going to use that live stream for evidence. I don't know. I just wanted to give my take on the whole thing. Well, folks, I bid thee good night, and until next time. Oh, and one last thing. Should I go for a 1930s era radio host for the rest of the streams? For all the broadcasts that are here to come? I'd like to know what your thoughts on that is. Anyways, until we meet again, my friends, I'm your host, William Wolfton, over and out.